Hello. Aha. All right. Want to say welcome to all of you, and to start things off, we're just going to sing a song. So if you grab a hymn book and turn to hymn number 550, 550, we're going to sing Footsteps of Jesus. Why don't we all stand up and sing together? I'm going to invite my daughter, Mackenzie, up here on the stage, and she's going to make a quick announcement for you. Go ahead and tell us how things are going to work, Mackenzie.
Hey, guys. Thank you so much for coming. So I'm here to say that we're going to open up the mics for people if they want to share some memories and stories with Dick Wakefield. And I'm firstly going to invite my fave, Uncle Mike.
Thank you, Mackenzie. All right. So, couple of things. I do think this is pretty cool. I didn't hear Danetta say this, but she said that this is probably Dad's best joke, that he's just trying to figure out how he can get all of us to stay around as long as he can. So that's why we're here. So, Dad was a storyteller. As long as we've known him, he just told stories and told them over again and over again, and we all loved to hear them. And so we wanted just to tell some stories, as she said, and give you an opportunity to tell some things about Dad that you remember if you would like. These microphones will be up here for you to come so everybody can hear that. Also, we're filming this service because there's people that can't be here today that would love to see it. So. But I get the opportunity just to tell a couple of things. And as Rick said, if you don't get up and tell stories, then we're going to stand up here and tell stories, for a while. So, but Dad had all these sayings, okay? You may have heard some of these sayings. So I got to think about this a few months ago. I thought, I need to start writing these things down as I remember them, some of the things that Dad said, some of the sayings that I keep saying. So and you may have heard these things, and they're probably not original with him, but here are some of the things that I just wrote down as Dad saying. So Dad would say, if you rhyme something, he would say, well, you're a poet and don't know it, but your feet show it. They're a couple of Longfellows. So also, if he saw something, if he saw like a truck that he really liked, he would say something like this, I wish I had that truck, and he had a feather up his nose, and we'd both be tickled. So... He would say, beauty is only skin deep, but ugly's to the bone. Beauty fades away, but ugly holds its own. I remember as a kid before I could drive, and I'd say, hey, I want to go over to Benny's house, to my friend's house, and he'd look at me and go, walking's not gone out of style, has it? So. He had also, this is saying, and I have no idea where this came from, but he would say, when the 30 days, when you're trying to remember how many days are in a month, 30 days has September, Well, Dad would say this, 30 days has September, April, June, and no wonder. All the rest like peanut butter except Grandma and she rides a tricycle. No idea. And I don't know where this one came from, and I'm sorry if this offends you, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. So he would say, there was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know when to quit. She gave them some broth without any bread, then pulled out her pistol and shot them all dead. Oh, man. Okay, I'm about done here. Also, if we got bored and we didn't know what to do, or we'd say, hey, what are we going to do next? Dad would say, well, we could choose upside and smell armpits. And I think his favorite saying, or one of his favorites, is not actually original with him, but was a limerick by E.E. Cummings that says, a mighty queer bird is the pelican. His beak holds more than his belly can. He holds more in his beak than he can eat in a week. And I don't see how I'll let you fill in the rest of that. So this is my story about Dad that I want to tell. So Dad, as he said, loved to tell stories, and he told them, this is kind of a Wakefield trait, not just a Dad trait, but if you're kind of a Wakefield storyteller, you have to make sure you get the whole context of the story, okay? So my son has really inherited this, so if he wants to tell you a story, we go back to in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and go from there. So that was kind of Dad, so he had to get the whole context of the story in and everything. So, and again, seriously, we've heard stories that Dad told just over and over again, which we love, everything. So Joshua and I came up to go fishing with Dad one spring, and we were coming up. We'd fish, and then we'd load the boat, and we were coming up out of the river bottom. And so I was trying to talk to Dad. I was asking him. One of Dad's favorite stories, of course, was about Granddad Wakefield the night he got saved, which is one of our favorite stories, all of us, and everything. And so, but I was trying to remember some of that story, because also on that night that Granddad got saved, Uncle Bob was in Kansas City, also witnessing to some of Granddad's family members, and they also got saved that same night. And so, but I couldn't remember how that story went, or I couldn't remember that part of the story. And so Dad is driving, and Josh was in the middle, and I'm over here. And I turned and I said, Dad, the night that Granddad Wakefield got saved, I said, wasn't there other family members, like his brother or sister? I can't remember. I said, wasn't there Uncle Bob, didn't somebody else get saved that night also? And Dad goes, have I never told you the story about the night that Dad got saved? And I turned and I said, yeah, Dad, you've told me that story. And before I could get a breath, here he goes. Well, that night, blah, blah, blah. He just got the whole context, the whole story. And Joshua's in the middle, and Joshua does this. And he told the whole story. So, somebody else, Rick, Tim?
Well, some of my most enjoyable times that we ever spent with Dad was on the river. And for several years now, in the spring, in June, Mike and Bob Lehman, a good friend of ours from Tennessee, they would come up and we would go play 36 holes of golf on Friday and then go floating on Saturday with Dad. And so when the COVID year hit in 2020, they didn't come up until September that year. And so my wife and my daughter and I decided that we were going to take Dad and Millie and Jordan and go on a float. And so we thought it was a great idea. And so the men were, the guys were in one boat and the women were in another boat. And so we're on the Gasconade and we come around a bend. And of course, you know how it changes from year to year. You don't know what you're going to run into. And so we come around a bend over a shoal, and there's a tree across the river. And so we just there's no way we can get the canoes, we could paddle through it or whatever. And so we pull over to the side on the gravel, and we get out and we help. Dad is walking with when taking floating, he'd take a paddle to help him walk with the paddle and stuff. And so we're getting out and we're looking, and I look at that brush pile, and there's water flowing under it, but right in the middle of it, there's a big old cottonmouth just sitting right in the middle of that brush pile. And so we're trying to decide what we're going to do, and so we decide we're going to have to portage the canoes over the gravel past. And so while we're doing all this, getting the canoes ready, and I look, and here's Dad. He's walking over towards that brush pile, and he's got a stick in his hand. And I said, whoa, whoa, hang on, old man. What do you think you're doing? And he said, well, we've got to get through here. And I said, no, we don't. We're going to go over here. We're just going to leave him alone. And so he was going to go try and kill that cottonmouth so we could go underneath the water. And I'm like, no, no, no. So we ended up portaging the canoes, going around and stuff. But I was like, hey, old man, that's not for you. If anybody was going to do it, it ain't going to be you. So, but there was another time, probably one of my favorite times that I ever got to spend with Dad floating is when, after I got out of prison and I was staying with Mom and Dad, and we were trying to go, Dad and I wanted to go floating. And so we tried to find a place. It had rained a little bit and it was muddy, and we went to all the spots on the Gasconade. We couldn't find one, so we were headed over towards Houston, whatever, and stuff. And he said, I used to go floating a long time ago on Beaver Creek. And I went, okay. I never did. I didn't even know where Beaver Creek was or whatever stuff. And so we went over there and we put in at Beaver Creek, and we started floating down, and we got into some shallow water and had some brush in it and some tall grass in it and stuff. And so we were out and we were trying to push the canoe through. And Dad's pushing through, and I'm in the front. And I grabbed hold of the canoe, and I said, whoa, 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 hang on. And he said, what? And so up in front of me was another log, and guess what was laying right up on top of that log? There's another big cottonmouth on there. And so I said, we're going to have to find some other way to get this around. So we backed it out, and we got it past that, and we continued to float. But I think probably on that float, I bet we saw somewhere between 8 to 12 cottonmouths just on that one float. But I'll tell you this, another thing that we saw on that same float, we were coming down a pretty big hole of water, and all of a sudden we could hear this eagle started screeching, and she would come flying over the top of us, and then she'd screech, and then she'd go, and then we finally noticed after about halfway down, we looked up, and there was a great big old eagle's nest there. And when she would go up, she would fly at us, and she would land, and then Dad would come. The daddy eagle would come down, and they did not like us in that territory. But that's one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen, was those two bald eagles flying over us there. And by the way, we caught a ton of fish on the Beaver Creek, but we never went back. So.
Okay, so obviously there's a lot of fun stories and funny stories, and we can share stories. By the way, we are going to try and wrap this thing up around 3:30. So if you have a story, you better get up here and get it told, because at 3:30 we're going to show a video of some memories of Dad. So, but let me tell a story that's one of my favorites. When we were kids, this time of year is really special for our family. Christmas time is special for us. And when we were kids, we always had Christmas Eve. We would go to church and we would have a Christmas Eve service. And then, stop it. And then we would come home and we would unwrap all of the presents that were from Mom and Dad, and then we'd go to bed that night and we'd wait for Santa Claus, and next morning we'd wake up, there'd be a present from Santa Claus for each one of us. So we had gone to church that night, and we had come home and we had unwrapped our presents. We'd had our supper and we'd unwrapped the presents, and we were just sitting around. This was when we lived in Kabul, and in Kabul the parsonage sat right next to the church. So the church was right there, and then our house was right here. And there was just down the street, just like a little ways, 25 yards down the street, was a little diner, but it also served as the bus stop. And so the bus would stop there and pick up passengers and drop off passengers that need to be picked up by other buses so that they could make the rest of their trip. And, of course, it was Christmas Eve, and so the diner had closed early, and it was cold. It was bitter cold. And so we had our supper and unwrapped our presents. We were just sitting around enjoying being with the family. And there was this little faint knock on the door. I shouldn't have started this one. But Mom and Dad went to the door, and there was a little boy standing there. And he was bundled up, and he said, I got dropped off by the bus driver, and I'm supposed to catch the next bus, but it's so cold, and your light was on, and I wondered if I could come inside and get warmed up. And so they said, no. Boom. No. I'm sorry. It was starting to get too serious for me there. So, anyway, so of course they said yes, and they brought this little boy in, and he was, what was he, 8 years old, and the bus driver had literally dropped him off outside of this little diner. There was no one there. It was closed. He sat there as long as he could, and he was just about half frozen to death. And they brought him in, and they fed him food. And we eventually just went to bed, but his next bus wasn't until like midnight. And so my mom and dad took care of him, and he fell asleep on the couch. And then when it got time, they woke him up and bundled him all back up, and then walked down to the bus stop and waited with him until the bus came. And that's just the kind of folks that my mom and dad were. All right, I got to get off stage now. Come on, sweetie.
So some of my best memories with my granddad was during the times that I'd come visit him here in Hartville. And I remember we would either stay in a hotel or stay mostly at my granddad's house. And so I'd wake up to the smell of bacon and biscuits and eggs. He was the best cook. He could cook. And he'd make fish, and it was so good. But some of my favorite memories with him was around Christmas time, whenever we would all get together and do our Secret Santa and our whole, like, gifts in the middle, and we had to draw cards to see who picked the number to go first, and we just go in the order of the cards. And some of my favorite times, even though sometimes they were the hardest for being the youngest, was watching Granddad slowly peel the paper individually. Watching him peel each paper like he was going to savor it for the rest of his life. So watching him peel back and then slowly do his smile and go, I like this one. And that's some of my favorite memories. It was so fun, and he just brightened every place he would go, and I'm still proud to call him my grandfather.
This is y'all's chance. Go ahead, sweetie.
One of my favorite things about my great Uncle Dick was when we would walk over to his house, like every week, we would always bring like a stack of paper, each of us, my two brothers and I, and we would fold them into different airplanes, even some airplanes that didn't really look like airplanes at all. And we'd fold them, and we'd throw them, and we'd try to get him on his fan while Uncle Dick told stories. It was actually his idea to throw him on his fan. And so for Christmas, he bought us each a ream of like 100 pieces of paper just so we could come over and fold them. And I remember that he'd grab his little tray and he'd get his note cards and he would fold them and he'd try to throw them as well.
So it's a misnomer. I don't really have a story to tell, but one thing that Granddad was always good at, other than giving advice and really good sermons, was advice. I'm sure many of you received some really good advice from him, and I feel like he would want me to give you the 3 best pieces of advice he ever gave me. And I've got a long history with him. He, as my mom told the story today, he's what got me interested in music. He was the one that baptized me, as many of you can attest to. He was also the one that married me and my wife, Jessica. She's in the back. Give a wave. Don't worry, I'll embarrass you later. But he said, we kind of asked him a little last minute, and so he said, well, we don't really have time to go through weeks and weeks of counseling, so pray for us. But he said, we'll do one counseling session with you, and he looked me straight in the eyes. And he told me something I'll never forget, and I want you all to hear this. He told me, son, you will never love your wife unless you love Jesus first. And so I'm here to tell you, you'll never love anybody the way they need to be loved unless you love Jesus first. Second advice he gave me when I wanted to be a pastor, Uncle Mike, you hit the nail right on the head. He was my hero too. Sorry, Dad. But when I asked him advice for me being a pastor, he told me 2 pieces of advice I'll never forget. One is, make sure that they know, your congregation knows that you love them. And all of you know who are in his congregation, he loved y'all. Amen? And I love the way he said it. He said, make sure they know. He didn't say expect that they will. He didn't say just tell them. He said, make sure, show them that you love them. And the other piece of advice he gave me, no matter what you're preaching on behind that pulpit, it's not important unless you're preaching Jesus. And some of you, as you're sitting here, may think, well, I'm not a pastor. That doesn't apply to me. Granddad was a pastor in life, but he wasn't always behind a pulpit. Pastor means shepherd. Preaching means proclaiming. And I've said this once in honor of him behind my pulpit. Not every believer is called to be a pastor, but every believer is called to be a preacher. And if you're not preaching Christ, you're preaching something else. So no matter what you're proclaiming in life, proclaim Christ, because that's what he did. Amen? All right. That's what I got.
Hi, everybody. Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paige. I'm one of his granddaughters. That was my brother who just talked, so talking runs in the family. It does. Yeah, it does. But I have 2 things. So the first one is just how ornery my granddad was. At a White Elephant gift exchange one time, he brought a disassembled, broken vacuum that he had wrapped in like 15 pieces in different boxes, and that was half of the gifts that were there. So that was who he was. The second story, a little more serious. This was a time in my life I was really digging into, what does it look like to really live by the power of the Holy Spirit? Like, what does that actually mean? And he told me, you just have to listen. You have to listen. You have to be willing to interrupt what you're doing, and you have to be willing to listen. And he told me a story about how he, one day, I don't even remember if he said what he was doing at the time, but it was like something said to him, you need to go visit this person in your congregation right now. You have to go right now. And he was like, okay, dropped what he was doing, got in his car, headed that way. And the man who the Lord had spoken to him to go visit was about to commit suicide. And Granddad was able to be there for him and stop it and help him work through that. But that's a story that'll stick with me forever. So if I take nothing else from my granddad's story, is that he listened. When the Holy Spirit told him to do something, he followed. And he took his family with him and he showed them that. And so that's what I want to do too. But yeah, that's who he was. And just bring the mic to you.
Okay, I'm started now. Well, I'm not a preacher. I'm just an elderly lady. For the last 2 years, I sit right in front of Dick. Me and him was best buddies and best friends. But I had the privilege of being what he said was his last sermon. Rick was gone, and he preached. One of the main things he said was his mother was a missionary. And he mostly talked about that, but he talked about a lot of things, and I can't repeat them all. But I was so proud because he said, you know, this is going to be my last sermon. And I'm sure he preached in where he was at, but he might be preaching now. But he was a dear friend to me and my family. And I have a big, tall grandson named Anthony. We get him to church once in a while. But he said, Joan, that was the best prayer I ever heard in my life was from Pastor Dick. So that was what I wanted to tell you all.
Hi, everybody. I'm an honorary nephew and fishing buddy, and really, Uncle Dick was more like a brother than anybody I ever had. But I wanted to tell you a story about, well, before I tell that, the last 25 years or so, he called me to come and do music at several revivals he led. At least one of them was here, I think maybe two, but I never really knew if he thought I was good at it or if he thought I needed it or if he thought I maybe felt sorry for me. I don't know. But Nan and I hadn't been married very long. We were living in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was running a tire store as usual, and I got a phone call one day. He had tracked me down where I was. I worked at several stores, but he tracked me down and said, this is Uncle Dick. I'm in town for a meeting, and he said, I'd like to take you two to dinner tonight over at my hotel, but he said, I'd like to have a little fun with my niece. He said, do you think you can get her over there without telling her why? And I said, well, yeah, I can come up with something, you know. So I told her some music producer wanted to meet me, and wishful thinking, I might add. And it wasn't far away from where we lived. We lived in an apartment on Harding Place, and I think it was the Ramada Inn over at I-24 in Harding Place or somewhere like that. So we found our way over there, and it was real busy because all the preachers were in town, you know, how it was sometimes. And so I looked around the room. We were kind of looking for him, you know. And Nan, she's looking around the room. And finally I saw him over there. He was with his friend Matt. And Nan kind of got over partway behind me like a little kid would, you know. And she said, Jeff, there's a man over there that looks just like my Uncle Dick. And I don't know if he sensed it or heard it or what, but he turned around and gave her that grin. And then she started punching on me. She said, you knew he was in town and you didn't tell me? I said, it was his idea. But anyway, I wish I could do one more service with him. Maybe we will someday.
All right, a lot of you know me, some of you don't. I was one of Dick's preacher boys. He was director of missions, and I was at Gainesville. I'll never forget the first time he took me out fishing. And he said first we were going out on visitation. And then he talked about fishing. I was like, no, wait a minute. How am I supposed to dress? And he said, oh, just bring your fishing stuff. I'm like, okay. Well, then I found out the canoe was named Visitation. So, you're talking about that smile that he gave, though. I remember when we were fishing that day, I was paddling, and all of a sudden, man, it started getting hard, and I'm like, well, there's not a lot of rapids or here or anything. I turned around and looked, and I'll be dadgum if he wasn't asleep. At least I thought he was. So I'm like, Dick. And then I happened to turn around just to catch him smile. He was pretending to be asleep, letting me do all the work. Just one of the many times that we did. Four men in my life that I call my mentor, and Dick was one of them. I think he was a prophet too, because when he was talking about retiring as director of missions, he said, hey, why don't you think about being director of missions? Him and a lot of you remember Jonesy. The two of them were saying, yeah, you need to be director of missions. I'm like, you guys don't know what in the world you're talking about. Well, guess what I'm doing now? So Pastor, I'm to be in director of missions. So anyway, I can't do much more. Dick meant so much to me. I just thank you for the opportunity of being here.
What a special man. I need to do something before I talk. When I met this family, one of these young people, I don't know who it was, let my wife and I have their bedroom in the old house at Kabul. We were there on a choir tour from First Baptist Union, Missouri. And that's where I fell in love with this whole family. And I'm glad I got to see Tim. I hadn't seen Tim since then. And I got to see him at the nursing home the other day. Two things, and such a special guy, and I'm just blessed to have several of those kind of guys in my life. But I kind of felt bad about this, and you can take it for what it's worth. I'd been up most of the night before, and Millie was back living with Dick, and I said, I want to get back over there and see them, and so I went over, and remember, I'd been up almost all night, and what did you say he was good at? What did he like to do? Tell stories. I told my wife, I said, Terry, I'm going to go over and visit with Dick and Millie for a while, and she said, I'll see you in a couple hours. And I have to confess, folks, after about 2 hours, and I'm usually the talker until I visited with Dick, and all of a sudden he said, wake up over there. I had fallen asleep. And the best thing that I ever did for Dick, I'd never met Millie. We'd moved away, and I was just traveling down Highway 60, and I stopped in at the Grove restaurant, and there was Dick with this new lady, and I knew who she was. And I don't even know who was with him. There was a young man with him. Was it one of you guys? No, Jordan. Okay, Jordan, okay. And I'd never seen him before. And so I love to embarrass Dick when I can. It's hard to do that. And I just walked right over there, and he turned around and looked at me, and when he did, I grabbed him like I used to do my dad once in a while, and I just laid a big old kiss on his cheek. And he just turned around and kissed me right back. Isn't that cool? Those are wonderful memories I'll never forget.
My name's Margaret, and my son Dennis over there, he used to work with Jordan at Unique Service, and that's where I met Dick and got to be friends with Dick and Jordan. And then he would call Jordan his brother. He's still his brother, he says. Yeah. And Jordan and Denny got along really good. And after my husband passed away 4 years ago, we don't drive. So Dick and Millie would take us to the dances, to the bowling, because Jordan bowled with them, and would take us places. And I say, Dick, can I give you gas? Nope, I don't want no gas money. I said, okay, why? He said, because the good Lord told me to do this for you guys. And I said, okay. And then even after when Millie left and Jordan left, he would still take us to the dances. And one time I said, hey, Dick, let's dance together. He said, I got two left feet, and they won't go with each other. And I said, okay. And then Millie said, no, we like watching you and Denny dance. And I said, okay, and I'm really, really going to miss him. And I did call him a month ago to talk to him and asked him how Millie and Jordan was doing. And he's really a sweet person. And even when John passed away, he was there for the funeral, you know, and helped us out with the situation. And then Jordan, they were looking for Jordan a blanket, a certain blanket. Well, I cut and tie blanket. And I said, what did Jordan like? And he says, Cardinals, Kansas City Chief. I said, okay. So I made him a blanket and gave it to him for Christmas. And he just loved that blanket. I said, Millie, can I make you one? No, but I had a special blanket that I made a long time ago, and I gave it to Millie. And she said, boy, that's the warmest blanket I have in my house. But he was a good person. You gonna say something, buddy? And he also called them Grandma and Grandpa.
Oh, yeah. I'm really going to.
Come on, buddy, it's okay. They know what you want to say. Okay.
Surprise.
He's up there with your daddy.
I don't know too many in here anymore, but I'm Bill Turner's daughter. And Bill Turner was a good friend with Dick. They were good buddies. They talked a lot. One day I got a call from my dad, and he said, Twana, we gotta help Dick out. And I said, what's wrong with Dick? You know, I thought something was wrong. He said, well, Mary Virginia's been after him. And and I said, oh no, what happened, you know? I said, what's she after him for? I'm sure it's legit. And he said, well, actually, she's been after him for years. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. He said, we've got to build him a big bookshelf because his boxes of books are going to cause further damage in the marriage, you know? And if you knew before Dick emptied some, I'm sure he boxed some more up. There were many boxes in their bedroom. And I said, okay, well, how big is this bookshelf? He said, it's going to be a big one. And I said, but I need you to come down and help me measure. So I went down with him, and Dick told us, he said, I want that whole wall covered if it's possible. And I was like, okay, Dad. So we proceeded to do some measuring, and Dad had to go around windows. We had to encase the windows, and we got the thing built, and we had to haul it on a trailer, and thank goodness Rick was there to help us unload it, and I don't remember if anybody else was there or not. But it was big. It was big. I mean, it seemed big to me at the time because I was helping with it. So we get it in there, and oh yeah, it just fits around that window. And then we fixed it some more, and of course the two noble men said, you get up on the ladder and anchor that in. And so anyway, we got it all anchored in, but then we realized we forgot one measurement, and one of it was there's an outlet in the wall. I don't know if there was one or two, but the one in particular. And so if you've ever built stuff, you know that you kind of want to cut that before you get it up there. So anyway, the one flaw on that bookshelf is that outlet hole was in the wrong place. And thank goodness Rick saved us. He was able to get it in the right place. But once you guys go through his books and stuff, you'll learn that there is a definite birthmark on that bookshelf. But Dick was gracious, and he said, oh, I got books to cover that. So anyway, there's a hole about yay by yay that there's not an outlet behind, but there is a big book in front of it. And so Dick saved me.
pulled it down because I project. So I have a fun story. The first mission trip I ever went on was with Dick and Jim are the specific people in this story that we went to this cafe and they're like, hey, do you want to try these new chicken strips? I was like, chicken strips? Yeah, sure, I'll try some chicken strips. And it's me and a couple other girls, and we're like, yeah, that sounds good. They get to the table, we try them. They taste like chicken. They are not chicken. They are mountain oysters. I remember that. I just think back at that multiple times in my life. I would have never tried them. I will eat them again.
When I was a little girl, my sister and I went to camp, and I don't remember where the camp was, but I know it had high steps, and we were not very big. My sister she only grew to 5 foot, but she was preemie. And Dick would pick her up and carry up the stairs. Then he'd come back down, and I said, why did you do that? Because she has short legs. I said, oh. And then I said, well, could I hold your hand while we go back up the stairs? That was the first time I met Dick Wakefield. He was a young man, but I don't remember anything else except him and carrying my sister up those steps at camp. And I'll always remember that.
I'm Jody. My wife Valerie's here. It was difficult to, when I heard the news, to be here today, just because he was my mentor too, in many ways over the years. I was one of the ones, along with many others, Jonesy included, that we went to Canada a number of times on those mission trips to Dryden. One year we couldn't make it across the border, so we ended up in Rockford, Illinois, taking a roof off a church. I don't know how we got into that one, but won't forget that. Rick and June Forrest were up on that roof. It was quite a time. But I remember we did some prayer walking also, because we were going to have VBS at that church during those times. And as I looked up at that white dove, I was able to go with Pastor Dick. He said, you want to go with me on these walks? I said, absolutely. And I don't know if he was testing me or just wanted to see what it was about, but I enjoyed it. But I remember seeing the dove. We both looked up at this one house, and in prayer walking, you go to houses and you kind of look at it and see if there's children's toys and things like that, and your prayers are based around what you see. And so we both looked up, and this white dove landed up on this house and looked at each other, and he just prayed love over that house. And it wasn't until this past week when my wife and I were discussing Pastor Dick that she brought up a very obvious point, not so obvious to me, but it was that word love. And she said everywhere we ever went with him, he showed love to everyone. Didn't matter who it was, and I know the Bible tells us in John 13 that the world will know you're my disciples by the love you have for one another, and he lived that. And I hope to carry that with my life, too.
So I'm Sarah. I'm one of the, what did we decide? I don't like an extra daughter-in-law. And in the summer, we were telling the story at lunch. In the summer of 1988, Tom and I had started dating a year prior. And Tom lived in Camdenton. Dick and Mary Virginia graciously let him live in the basement of that house. But Rick and Netta were there for the summer, and so we were dating, and I was just an hour away, and I would come up on the weekends, and this was going to be the first time I was going to come up to visit their family, and so Tom says to them, just don't make fun of how big her hands are. Because I have big hands, and Dick had big hands, so like I felt kind of petite, but anyway, so all night long, like we're playing cards, and they're just handing me more cards because they want to see how many cards I can hold. And then, so this is the first time I met him, and that's what they're doing to me. And then we had dinner, and Mary Virginia was always a good cook, and I ate normal portions. But I didn't eat seconds, and so then I was being chastised by Rick and Mitzi and Dick about how you don't like teen food. And no, I like her food, I just don't eat like you all. But I look back on that, and I think about the love and the space that was created in their home to create a space where you weren't afraid to bring your best friend home. And after a while, he just stuck around. And because of that, my family gained a second family. And I think, my children never got to know Tom's parents, but they had family, and that was because of Dick and Mary Virginia, and they set the tone for that, and I will forever be grateful.
Last chance. Oh, here's Miss Loretta. Is that what she said? Yeah. That's not very nice, is it?
I'm Loretta Pyatt, and I just love Dick's smile and his hugs. Every time he'd be in church, he would always, pull me down there to hug me. He just had such big arms. But the smile, his smile was, you knew he loved the Lord. There was no denying it. I know he would talk to me about being in the hospital and stuff, and he said, everybody knew that I was a Christian because I shared with everybody that come into the room. And I understand that, because when I went through leukemia, I was that way too. When people come in, they knew I was a believer, and I only had one person that didn't like it, but anyway, it didn't matter. But he was always caring with everybody. I don't think he ever got mad, did he? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, I never seen that side of him. But he will be missed.
Okay, I don't know if I can talk without crying, but Dick was one of my dearest friends, which is funny saying he's 40-some years older than me, but he was one of my dearest friends. And I met him 25 years ago. My mom used to do the church bulletin, and he would come in, and I worked at the internet office, and he would come in and bring the bulletin so I could give it to Mom so she could type it up. And he would just stay and visit with me, and then I started coming to church here, and he ended up being my pastor for a few years. And then after that, he was still my friend, and then I became his resident tech support. And so he would call me, and he would be like, Lynn, my computer's not working. And one of the funniest times I remember is I went over there, and it was just unplugged, guys. And so I plugged it in, and he said, I promise I didn't do that just so you'd come visit, but it worked. And so I stayed, and like many of you shared, when I went to Dick and Mary Virginia's and then later Dick and Millie's, my husband always knew I was going to be gone for a lot of hours. I'm like, now Dick said his printer's not working, it should take me about 15 minutes, right? And he said, I'll see you about 8:30. And that was just Dick, and every time I left and every time I saw him anywhere, he would give me a hug and say, girl, you know you're so special to me. And I know he made every single person that knew him feel that way. he made us all feel special, and that's what I'll carry in my heart forever.
Brother Dick was a very special pastor. He pastored in Camdenton when I had lost my 3-year-old daughter. And he saved my life. My mother had called me and knew something was not right. I was ready to commit suicide. And she called him, and he came right over, but before he got off the phone with me, he said, I just want to tell you something. Because at that time I was having marital problems. And he said, you better stop and think who's going to be taking care of those other 2 girls you have. It will not be your family, it will be his family. And he came over, and I got into counseling, but he literally saved my life. He was a great man, and will be missed.
You know, Dick, when I think of Dick, one word comes to mind: legacy. He left a legacy behind him that has touched so many lives, not just in this building, but in the central part of the United States. He was a special man. I'll never forget the first time I ever met Dick. I wasn't on the pulpit committee at that time, and he came, and we were in this old building over here. And back in the day, we kind of had a split worship service. You guys remember that? We had a worship service of old hymnals, and then we had a praise and worship time too. And I'll never forget when Dick got up the first day, and he said, my goodness, this is a rocking church. And back in that day, we had a reputation that we kind of got after things. But he loved that life. Dick loved life. But he also, in the legacy that he did, one thing that I think that stands out, he set a bar for pastors that is so high. You think about, not only was he a good preacher with the word, but he lived the life of the pastor outside of that. I'll never forget, I got run over by a cow several years ago, and we were between pastors, and Dick and Millie had just gotten married, and I got hurt pretty bad. I was in ICU, and who do you think was the first one that was there to see sit with my wife? It wasn't such a big deal to me, but that's when I realized how important it is for a pastor to be there for the family, not so much just for the person that's hurt, because they're going through so much wonder. But he left a mark on me that day I'll never forget. And he's left a mark within every one of you guys that you've told the stories today. It's so nice to hear the funny ones, the sincere ones, because that was Dick. He was funny, but when it got down to it, he was serious about God. And he's left that mark. He's left that legacy. And you guys should be proud to have had a father that did that. And you guys have been a blessing to me through this week. And Dick's been a blessing to my life for a long time. And it wasn't very many weeks ago, I was telling the guys that he came in there and seen me and sat on the couch, and we talked about this day that was coming. He said, one of these days, he said, you're going to be coming and getting me, Alan. He said, now I'm ready. And of course, I told him, I said, Dick, the way you hang on to things, and you can do so many things, I said, don't be surprised if I'm not gone before you are. But good Lord took him home. But I'll tell you, he's blessed our lives. And guys, you're very fortunate to have had a father that was such a legacy in life.
That really good-looking young lady that came up here a little bit ago is my wife. That's the best thing I could say today, because Brother Dick, that good-looking young lady right there is my wife. I love Brother Dick with all my heart. There's no surprise to anybody in this room. What a phenomenal man. He loved more than anything I could think. I don't know how to explain it. I see so many heads going like this because you all know. And that's why we're here, is to let y'all know that you're blessed. Oh, Lord. God bless this. I met Brother Dick Kabul. I was a music and youth minister in Houston, Missouri at the time. And through Tim and wrangling all that around, and we got to know each other. And Brother Dick, just kind of like everybody else, he kind of put his arm around me. And it was my first church, and he was gracious and wise and gave great leadership. And in spite of all he could do, I still stunk. But God didn't. God's a great God. When I heard Brother Dick had passed, I got to tell you, my heart went, yeah. Oh. He's there. That guy that he worked for all those years, he's right there. And the Lord's got him wrapped up saying, well done, my good and faithful servant. Gonna miss him tremendously. But man, I can't wait to see him and get to wrap my arms around him again.
Okay, I'm coming back up here. One of the day that I found out that my granddad died, I was so confused, but I knew that the day was coming. And I never knew my grandma teen. I still am. I'm the baby of the cousins, the youngest. It has its perks. But I grew up with my grandma Millie, which was one of the hardest things through my granddad's death. I lost my grandma Millie as well, which is still hard. But I know that in the midst of all that happening, and my mom and dad were crying on the couch, and it was during Sunday service, what a perfect time for him to leave, am I right? Can I get an amen with that? All I could say was, he's dancing. And my mom was like, what? I said, he's dancing with Grandma Teen right now. Him and her are celebrating, it's a reunion. He's celebrating, God's giving him a pat on the back and saying, well done. And my mom said, you're right. He's dancing with her. They're having fun. It's a reunion with the rest of the Wakefields. And I said, that's where he wanted to be. And I'm glad that he gets to have that moment and that chance.
Most of you know me, Dean Pyatt, my wife. Little Creek, thank you for putting this on. We're from Mount Zion. Dick spent a lot of time at Mount Zion also. I was able to, he showed up, guys, when he didn't feel like it. He'd get in the car and drive up there, and we're going, oh my gosh, he's driving again. Let him leave before we move. But before he had his surgery, I mean, he couldn't hardly walk. He couldn't hardly do. But he loved the Lord so much, and he wanted to be somewhere at the church. And I'm thankful that he was here. I want to thank Rick and Donetta for going on their week-long trips, allowing us to have Dick there at our church. Nothing against you guys, but thank you. Several times they would leave and he would come in. Joan said, I was there the last time he was there, and I wish Rick would have been there. That's what I wish y'all would have been there, because we don't know when that last time is. You need to support your pastor. You need to be here every time you can. I mean, he's a great man, but, you know, we got a lot younger people coming up. That's going to be, like I said, the bar's high, but we learn a lot.
Many of you might not recognize me because the last time I saw Pastor Dick, it was sadly about 5-6 years ago, and I've grown up a little bit. Many of you have talked about being mentored by Dick Wakefield, and I was a little too young to be mentored by him, but definitely secondhand. I can think of the many trips to Colorado or the trips to Canada my dad was part of. I hear these stories. I hear these miracles. I remember one specifically, we were doing a VBS, the many that he's done. I'm sure he probably did thousands of VBSs. And we were out of food. This was serious. We were feeding so many in this community, out of food, and we were praying for the Lord to provide. And out of nowhere, one of the host families came in with a giant pot of chili right after our prayer. And it was a huge loaves and fish moment. And, you know, I hear all these stories of these miracles that I was too young to comprehend. But I can tell you of one miracle I got to witness all the time with Pastor Dick and his time with Millie out off of the lake there in Hartville. I got into middle school and high school, and I ran cross country. And many times, whenever it was in the heat of the summer, we had to get into our training. We had to run, and we would always go down that dirt road. And if you've ever drove through there, there's no shade. It's brutal. And you're running. I witnessed this miracle time after time because his hospitality, even at 80 plus years old, was sitting out there with the water hose. And he was always welcome. Hey, Matt, if you've got the kids coming out, they can have as much water as they want. That was the miracles I got to witness with him. I might not have been able to be mentored, but his legacy, oh, it's still here. It's still here.
Anybody else? Well, while you are thinking about it, I personally want to thank you for those of you that came and visited Dad. It really meant a lot to him and to us. We do want to thank Little Creek and for providing the lunch and providing this building for this time today. This was, if y'all didn't know, this was all laid out. This was all planned. If y'all hadn't seen it, some of you know what I'm talking about. But we want to thank you because there's a lot of churches that he served that are represented here today. And I know that he meant a lot to you. And it shows us that he was important to you too, just like he was important to us. And thank you for being here today to help us celebrate Dad's life and his ministry. But if nobody else has got anything to say, then we're going to show the DVD, and then we'll have a prayer and be dismissed.